In 1840, Thomas Randall stood in the middle of the field his father once plowed and decided to build something that would never rot. Not a home, not a barn, something permanent. His new bride Eunice watched with calm approval as workers laid the first stones, unaware that Thomas had altered the blueprints 5 separate times before breaking ground. The estate was gifted land, passed down by old money, and overlooked a quiet stretch of woods known to locals as Dyer's Hollow. The couple's arrival was a gift to the town, at least that's how it felt. They hosted harvest meals for poor families, sent wagon loads of apples to the church pantry, and offered warm bread to passers-by whether they asked or not. It was a house that welcomed, but only from the outside. Inside, the walls were thick, not just for warmth, but for silence. The floors groaned in patterns as if something beneath was shifting long after the builders left. Workers whispered about rooms that hadn't been in the original plans. One man, a bricklayer from Ashfield, refused to return after discovering a staircase that descended too far for the size of the house. When asked what he'd seen, he only said, "There's no soil that deep in Dyer's Hollow." Thomas let him go without protest, as if he expected someone would flinch. As the house neared completion, rumors gave way to admiration. The kitchen could feed 30. The parlor held shelves of hymnals and softened chairs, and the entryway was lined with wool rugs, stitched by hand. Eunice herself arranged the guest room with lace curtains and holy verses carved into cedar frames. But beneath it all, far beneath, the root cellar grew in ways no visitor would know. It was deeper than frost lines, deeper than wells. Dug by hand, it was lined with stone and clay, with alcoves carved like side chapels. Each one marked with a different letter. No one was ever told what they stored there. The townsfolk adored the Randalls. Every fall, they opened their doors to the parish for cider and squash stew. Children were given braided loaves. Adults offered spiced cider steeped in iron kettles warmed by hidden fire. No one ever asked why the stew had such richness, or why no one saw deliveries of meat. Eunice was praised for her generosity, her soft hands, her watchful eye, her calm voice that said grace with such sincerity it made some cry. When she took in a young girl whose family had drowned in a creek accident, the town called her a saint. No one asked where the girl slept, or why her shoes were never seen again. The house gave, it opened, it sang, but it was also growing inside itself. By 1845, 17 rooms had been recorded on blueprints, but some rooms were never visited again once finished. One builder described laying brick for a curved hallway that led to nowhere. When he asked Thomas what it was for, Thomas answered, "Some things are only meant to turn back." In winter, smoke rose from 3 chimneys even when no one reported firewood deliveries. The trees near the house never dropped all their leaves as if they feared the soil. Stray dogs avoided the fence line. Mail was always collected before sunrise as if no one slept. And still the town loved them. Still the church praised them. Eunice embroidered linens for baptisms. Thomas donated timber for a new schoolhouse. They were models of generosity. But the house, known only as the Harvest House in local letters, was already something else entirely. It was a body with too many rooms, a heart that pumped silence instead of blood. And beneath the lowest stair, something was being prepared that would outlast them both. Eunice Randall's apron never had a stain. Her hands, even in the dead of winter, were soft, warm, and pale. Never burned, never cut, never tired. Women in Dyer's Hollow spoke of her like a miracle. How she remembered every child's birthday, how her biscuits could hold warmth for hours. But no one ever asked why her kitchen had no windows. They only marveled at her voice, soft as butter, clean as church air, and the way her shoes made no sound on the hardwood floor. They called her the Angel of the Hollow. No one knew what she kept under the floorboards. No one dared ask what she meant when she said the broth was listening. Behind her kindness was a ledger, a small cloth-bound book she carried in her apron pocket. Labeled plainly portions, it never left her side. Some believed it held recipes passed down through generations. But inside were no ingredients, no mention of herbs or grain. Only entries like 1 2-hour sobbing, stir gently, no shrieks, ruins balance. Another read, single scream okay, double scream curdles milk, third scream restart. Each line was dated. Some pages had faint brown smears along the margin. Eunice marked these with a symbol, a curled loop shaped like a ladle. It appeared beside entries that mentioned scalding. Beneath the kitchen trapdoor was a ladder smoothed down by use, leading to a stone chamber lined with narrow shelves. But they held no food, no preserves, no bags of flour, just metal tools, each labeled with painted script: tongue pin, softener, reeding cloth, bone hook. There was no stove, only a wall cavity lined with soot and something like rope burned into the corners. Eunice believed in precision, not just in food, but in obedience. She told one maid years later that every human being had a note, like in a hymn. And her task, her holy task, was to bring them into harmony. Some children, she said, scream in the wrong key. It ruins everything. The maid quit the next morning, but not before she heard the trapdoor close behind her, slowly, like a breath being held. Eunice cooked every meal with silence. The pounding of meat was never heard. The clatter of pots never reached the hallway. Yet the kitchen always smelled alive, sweet, hot, spiced like something writhing. The tea was never bitter. The bread was never too dry. But no one remembered ever delivering ingredients. When asked how she did it, Eunice would smile and say, "I know what a body needs." Once during a rainstorm, the pastor's wife was given refuge and slept by the hearth. She awoke in the night to a low humming, not from above but beneath the floor. She followed the sound and placed her ear to a wide plank near the trap door. She heard sobbing, short, shallow, rhythmic, as if being measured. She told no one until she was near death, and even then she whispered it in shame, as though confessing her own crime. Eunice's voice, so often praised, was sometimes heard echoing faintly through the floorboards of the parlor when guests stayed too long. Not words, just long, winding vowels, rising and falling like water being stirred with something metal. One traveler, a surveyor passing through, said he dreamed of drowning the night he slept there. Said he awoke to the taste of salt on his lips and a spoon on the floor by his bed. When he left without his boots. The townsfolk never saw Eunice lose her temper, never heard her raise her voice. But the ledger she kept recorded everything: the date, the time, the temperature of the fire, the sound each child made, the ratio of whimpers to cries, the thickness of liquid, the absorption rate of cloth. She logged failures, too much biting, results spoiled, and marked successes with a symbol shaped like a half moon. No one ever found the original recipes, because there were none. Only portions, only pain, measured and reduced, until what remained was silence that could be swallowed. And when she sang in church, her voice rang so pure no one thought to ask what she practiced in the kitchen when the doors were closed. When Eunice Randall summoned a seamstress to the house in the late spring of 1847, she did so without ceremony. No carriage met the woman at the edge of Dyer's Hollow. No servant greeted her at the gate. The letter had simply said a child had passed and a burial garment was needed. The fourth Randall child, another girl just 6 years old, had reportedly died in her sleep from a sudden choking, though no physician ever signed the notice. The burial was to be private, quiet. Eunice met the seamstress at the door, face calm, eyes unreadable. Her voice held no tremble. "We'll need something white," she said, "but not pure." The nursery was oddly quiet, not the stillness of grief, but something colder. The window was shuttered despite the sunlight, and the fireplace was unlit. The child's body lay on a long table pushed beneath a wall sconce, her arms folded, her lips pressed closed with unnatural precision. The skin was pale, but not with death alone. There were lines along the cheeks as if something had pressed there too long. Her hair had been cut unevenly, and one of her fingers was wrapped in cloth that seemed too thick for its size. The seamstress, a woman named Myra Elkin, had dressed many children for burial. She'd seen drowning, fever, even burns. But this child, she didn't look peaceful. She looked stored. While searching for thread, Myra reached behind a bureau near the crib and felt air. A draft where there should have been wood. She leaned closer and found a narrow vertical seam in the wallpaper. When she pressed, the panel shifted slightly inward, revealing a sliver of a hidden chamber. Too tight for standing. More like a vertical crawl space. Inside, the air smelled of dust and iron. She saw strips of fabric knotted like tourniquets, a rusted pair of shears, and a small hook bolted into the wall, from which hung something limp and flesh-toned. At first, she thought it was a stocking, but it wasn't woven. It was skin. Too soft, too round at the edge. Next to it lay clumps of hair, dull and uneven, as if cut without care. Or torn. On the stone shelf below sat a dish with dried residue. A dark ring hardened around its rim. No toys, no shoes, just implements. Myra stepped back, heart pounding, the weight of breath thick in her throat. Eunice returned minutes later and remarked only that the fabric she chose was suitable, so long as it doesn't unravel. Myra didn't mention what she'd seen. She stitched the dress in silence, her fingers trembling with each pull of the needle. She was not invited to the burial, nor was the pastor. In fact, no one in town recalled seeing the child's grave. When someone asked months later, Thomas claimed she'd been laid to rest in the family's private grove. But no grove was marked, no stone ever carved. A year later, Myra told her sister in a letter that she still dreamt of the slit in the wall, of the hook, of the hair, that she sometimes heard scratching behind her own nursery door and had to check the walls by candlelight. She kept the letter hidden, but after her death it was found tucked behind a drawer panel, wrapped in cloth. Alongside a child's button Myra claimed she'd taken that day from the Randall floor. It was scorched on one side. The Randall house continued to host dinners. Children still received sweets at harvest. But no one asked again about the fourth child. The townspeople accepted the silence as a kind of grace, as if some deaths weren't meant to be witnessed, as if some families were allowed to bury without record. What remained behind the nursery wall stayed sealed, the hook still mounted, the air still stale, and in the corner of the room behind the painted crib and embroidered cushions, there was always a faint smell of rust, masked but never gone. The last person to speak about the Randall children with any clarity was a housemaid named Lydia Ware, long forgotten by the town, tucked away in a brick-walled sanatorium on the outskirts of Ashfield. She was near 70 when she finally opened her mouth, her voice brittle as frost, her hands trembling as if still waiting to be struck. She'd worked in the Randall house as a young girl, barely 15, taken in for linen work and parlor dusting. She said she never saw anything awful, not exactly, not all at once. But she heard it, and she heard what followed. She remembered how Eunice always instructed the children to sing when chores were done. Not just hum, but lift their voices in full hymn. Measured, rhythmic, word perfect. They were never to stop unless given permission. The music filled every hallway, floating through air vents and under closed doors. Eunice called it the Holy Coverlet, a term she used with sacred weight. Lydia said she didn't understand at first, until one Sunday when the music started at noon and didn't stop. She had brought fresh towels to the second floor and noticed the odd tone of the song. Strange intervals, clipped notes, voices fraying at the edge. It wasn't joyful, it was strained. Below the hymn, something else was rising, at first faint, then growing, a sound that didn't belong in the song, something behind it, a rhythm of something pounding or being dragged. Short, wet gasps, then silence. And still the hymn continued. Through the winding hall, down the stairs, past supper and into night. Lydia remembered setting the table as the voices went hoarse. No child asked for water, no one came to rest. Eunice stood in the hallway, lips moving slightly, eyes closed, hands folded. She swayed gently, as if caught in a wind only she could feel. When the meal ended, the music still poured from the children's room. Lydia asked the oldest boy the next morning why the hymn hadn't stopped. He looked at her flatly, then said, "Because Mama said she's peeling silence." He said it like it meant something sacred, as if silence was something you could skin from a person if you scraped long enough. Lydia began to fear the music. She learned to tell the difference between joyful song and covered sound. There was always a way the voices bent when they weren't singing for pleasure. When Eunice sat at the organ in the parlor and played, the children responded like they were being summoned. Not with smiles, not with laughter, but with obedience. Sometimes Lydia swore she heard them singing with mouths too full to form words, and the sound, high, watery, thin, would slither through the grates in the floor like a cry in disguise. One day, while changing the bedding in the nursery, she noticed sheet music on the dresser. But the notes were wrong. They weren't proper scales, more like jagged lines, as if measured not by pitch but by length. Some lines were smudged with fingerprints, oily and faintly red. At the top, written in Eunice's delicate hand, were the words, "For layered noise." Lydia never asked again. She left the house a month later and never returned. But she said the hymns stayed with her, following her into sleep, into bathwater, into rooms where no one else stood. She said that the screams never stopped. They just became song, bent and quieted like bones wrapped in silk. She died with her head pressed to the pillow, humming a tune no nurse recognized, but one that made the window panes vibrate. They covered her face with a cloth, but her lips kept moving underneath. And for hours after, the room felt warmer than it should have, thick with sound that no one dared name. In 1873, the Harvest House stood empty, its brickwork browned with age, its shutters bowed inward like the house had spent years listening. The Randall family had long since vanished. No formal sale, no recorded deaths, only a quiet disappearance that left the estate to rot. When a distant cousin by marriage, Elijah Varn, inherited the property through a convoluted string of wills, he brought in a team of renovators to modernize the structure. He was a man of industry, eager to scrape away the past and replace it with gaslight fixtures and smooth plaster. But the house did not yield easily. The second parlor had always been cold. Even in summer, it held a dampness that no sun could lift. The floor there had warped, boards curling at the edges as though something beneath had pushed up, desperate to breathe. Elijah ordered the floor torn out, thinking it water-damaged. The workers pried the planks free with iron crowbars and splintered fists, revealing not rot, but a shallow cavity filled with dust, shards of porcelain, and lined rows of something far stranger. Clay dolls. 24 no taller than a hand, shaped crudely but deliberately. Each figure was curled slightly forward at the shoulder as if bracing against something. Their faces bore no expression, just faint indentations where eyes should have been. But it was the torsos that froze the men in place. Each doll had a nail driven into its center, some long, some short, all rusted with time and something darker. The dolls were arranged in pairs and threes, their limbs tangled like they had been dropped mid-struggle. One figure bore a name etched into its base, Bethy. None of the family ledgers, church logs, or burial records listed a Bethy Randall. The name was absent from every known census, every baptismal roll. But someone had made her, and someone had pressed the nail deep enough to split the clay from chest to spine. When Elijah lifted that doll, a fine thread of hair unraveled from beneath it, too long to be animal, too coarse for fabric. Beneath the dolls were bits of cloth torn from what had once been children's garments. A cuff, a hem, a shoelace. Most were stiff with age, some still bearing the curve of a small ankle or wrist. And at the bottom of the cavity, a long flat slat of wood had been carved with a word, now half faded. The surviving letters spelled something like re-readin', though the meaning was unclear. One worker claimed it was a name. Another said it was a word used in tannery, the process of softening hides. The renovation halted. Elijah ordered the figures burned, but the fire failed twice before the third attempt finally took. The dolls hissed as they blackened, emitting a sour, earthy smell that lingered in the parlor for days. No one stayed in the house after dusk. Workers quit one by one, citing nightmares, sudden illness, or the sense that the house knew they were trying to change it. Elijah left without finishing the work. He returned to Boston and died within the year. The house remained empty again, its windows grayed over, its parlor locked. But the boards that had once covered the cavity were left stacked in the hallway. No one nailed them back down. And from time to time, those who passed the front gate said they heard tapping from the second floor. Soft, rhythmic, like small hands on old wood, or maybe nails trying to be pulled back out. By 1851, Thomas Randall no longer signed letters as Mr. He had adopted the title Doctor, though no formal training backed it. No degree hung on his wall, and no one in Dyer's Hollow recalled him attending any university. But people still came, not from the town, they knew better by then, but from farms and parishes farther out, drawn by word of mouth and cheap fees. The sick, the tired, the poor who couldn't afford city physicians. He treated them from a side wing of the harvest house, through a narrow side entrance that opened only from within. There was no sign, only a horseshoe nailed upside down above the door. He told them it kept illness from returning. Thomas spoke softly and rarely smiled. His treatment began with questions that had little to do with symptoms. Do you ever feel shame near water? Do your dreams leave a taste? When you cry, what color is it in your mouth? He examined tongues by candlelight and always wore gloves, even in summer. His remedies were equal parts bloodletting, leeching, and what he called purity pressing, where cloth soaked in boiling herbs was tied around joints until the skin broke. He believed pain was a map to origin. Disease, he once told a farmer's wife, is what the soul leaks when it's not kept clean. But it was the hygiene room that none could forget, and yet none remembered leaving. It was a narrow, stone-lined chamber tucked at the rear of the house. No windows, no shelves. The door bore no knob, just a ring pull made of iron and set low as if meant for crawling hands. Patients said they were instructed to remove clothing and enter barefoot. Thomas claimed it was necessary for the leeching to reach the bone. Most remembered only the first moments inside, cold light, the echo of water somewhere far below, and then nothing. One woman, Emmeline Poole, kept a diary in her final months. Her entries grew erratic after her visit to the hygiene room. She wrote of burning sensations in her joints, a constant ringing in her teeth, and waking up with soil packed under her nails. He said my dirt was in the bone, she wrote. He said he'd get it out. He kept washing, but I was never clean enough. Her final entry read only, I think he took something that used to hurt, but now I can't remember what it was. When she died, her fingernails were gone. Not broken, gone. The coroner noted signs of advanced nerve damage and scar tissue along her rib cage in patterns he could not explain. He ruled it exhaustion. The burial was quiet. Her family did not seek answers. Most did not. Those who managed to return from the hygiene room never went twice, but a few didn't return at all. Thomas said they left while he was tending to other patients, that they wandered off or were picked up by relatives. He was never questioned formally. His notes, if he kept any, were written in a strange cipher, slashes and dots, like tally marks scattered in chaotic rhythm. The room itself was eventually sealed shut with iron nails, but behind the plaster, even years later, visitors swore they smelled vinegar and warm stone. Some said the walls felt damp when passed too closely. And one boy, exploring during a harvest tour decades after the Randalls had vanished, found a piece of wood lodged behind the molding near the door. On it was carved a single word in a child's unsteady hand. Unwashed. By 1882, the harvest house was quiet again, its doors shuttered, its land overgrown with wheat that no one harvested. And yet a new birth was announced. Letters sent to distant relatives, some of whom hadn't heard from the Randalls in over a decade, spoke of joy, of two souls born into one covenant. There were no midwives listed, no baptism recorded. Just two names written in black ink, Clara and Elias, twins, a blessing, the letter said, a gift that would complete the shape. One cousin, Miriam Hale, came from Boston to visit that spring, invited without warning and hesitant to accept. But she had memories of Eunice's grace, of her soft voice and the smell of bread that filled the halls. She arrived by carriage, her gloves tight, her mind already half made up to leave within the day. But the house opened like it had never been empty. Fire burning in the hearth, floors polished, Eunice waiting at the door with a smile that hadn't aged. The children will be glad, she said, guiding Miriam inside. Clara was shown immediately, a small girl, delicate, pale like milk, with a strange stillness behind her eyes. She did not speak, but followed Eunice's hand like a shadow. She is the visible one, Eunice said. She does what light requires. No mention of Elias, no sign of a second crib, no extra set of shoes. Miriam asked gently if the other child was resting. Eunice only answered, he keeps watch, she keeps form. That night Miriam wandered the upstairs hallways, unable to sleep. The house had changed, its rooms bending differently than she remembered. Doors stood where windows once had. Mirrors faced nothing, and the air carried the scent of yeast and iron. Near midnight, she reached the top landing and saw a girl standing by the attic hatch. Clara, but not the same. This child was twitching slightly, eyes wide and unfocused, and whispering in a strange cadence. Each word repeated 3 times. She sleeps, she sleeps, she sleeps. He breathes, he breathes, he breathes. Miriam asked her name. The girl answered, Clara, 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 but Mama says the attic girl gets none. Then she turned to the sealed hatch and placed her palm against it, whispering, he made me out of her ribs. Her hand left behind a dark smear on the wood, too red to be dust. Miriam fled the next morning, claiming illness. She wrote only one letter after she left, addressed to a friend in Salem. There are 2, but only one casts a shadow. The other makes it move. The letter was kept unread by most until her death. No one else saw the attic girl again. But others who visited spoke of strange laughter overhead, of thumping at night like dragging limbs. Some claimed the chimney rattled when there was no wind. In 1890, during a structural inspection for tax reassessment, a builder discovered a small wooden box hidden behind a false attic wall. Inside, 2 sets of fingernail clippings, 2 teeth, and a stitched linen square embroidered with the words, "First came silence, then the match." The hatch remained sealed. The room above never entered. But in the years that followed, passers-by claimed the attic window sometimes showed a face, not watching, not blinking. Just there, a second child unseen and unnamed, the twin who stayed behind, or perhaps the one who had been taken and stitched back in. In July of 1887, a chimney sweep named Reuben Clark arrived at the Harvest House with his younger brother Ellis, a wiry boy of 12 who tagged along for extra coin. The Randall estate had stood silent for years, but a new caretaker, a man with no surname and gray gloves that never came off, had placed a request through town. The main chimney, 3 stories tall and long dormant, needed clearing. Reuben took the job without question. He was used to strange houses, but he wasn't ready for the way this one breathed. The air inside was hot and thick, as expected for midsummer. Yet parts of the house, the deeper halls, the lowest staircases, held a stillness that felt too heavy for heat. The walls narrowed in unnatural ways, angles where corners should be, doors placed too low as if made for crawling. Still, Reuben worked. He sent Ellis to collect brushes and rope while he examined the first shaft. But as the day wore on, the light seemed to fade faster than it should have. By late afternoon, the air turned dry and brittle, and a smell like wet stone began to rise from beneath the floorboards. It was Ellis who vanished first. Reuben called his name down 2 halls, then 3, until he heard something scrape behind a crooked wall panel near the servants' quarters. He pried it loose, thinking it a vent, but behind it was a narrow crawl space, darker than pitch, lined with old slate bricks that glistened as though recently licked. He hesitated only a moment before crawling in, calling for Ellis. The space should have been shallow, but it kept turning, sloping, twisting down like a drain, until suddenly the temperature dropped. He entered a chamber no blueprint had mentioned. A circular room, walls lined with slate and iron hooks embedded at head height. The floor slanted inward, shallow like a bowl. In the center, a large stone slab sat stained at the edges and worn smooth where something, or someone, had been laid again and again. It was cold. Not cellar cold, not wind-cooled. Cold like absence. Cold that moved beneath the skin. Reuben began to shake. He saw notches carved in the stone walls, small and wide-spaced, some chipped as if gnawed. Rows of them. Bite marks, he realized. Not clawed, not chiseled. Bitten. A rusted pail in the corner was filled with water that hadn't frozen but steamed in reverse, as if the chamber were pulling heat from it. Reuben called again for Ellis, but his own voice came back broken, echoing strangely, syllables falling apart mid-air. He ran, crawled back the way he came, scraping skin from elbows and knees. The hall twisted wrong. The door he'd entered through was gone, or changed. Somehow he found light again. Burst from a side pantry into the kitchen, gasping, clothes damp with sweat that was freezing to his spine. He never went back for the tools, or for Ellis. The housekeeper claimed the boy had never entered. That only one man came and one man left. When Reuben protested, screaming in the yard, she handed him a brush, one of his own, wrapped in twine. It was warm, too warm. The townsfolk said he went mad within the week, spoke only of teeth in the stone, of warmth turned inside out. He died 2 winters later in a poorhouse, clawing at the walls of his cell, mumbling something about the hooks that sang. Ellis was never found. But some say the attic windows sometimes show a flicker, not of a child, but of something crouched and watching, with a mouth too wide and a face too still. Others swear that when the wind moves wrong through Dyer's Hollow, It carries the echo of breathless teeth grinding across slate. Not screaming, just waiting. Cold without ice, hunger without sound. In the autumn of 1893, 2 years after Eunice Randall's quiet death in the upstairs room with no mirror, a distant niece arrived to settle what little remained of the family's visible estate. The woman, Margaret Allen, was soft-spoken and sharp-eyed, raised far from Dyer's Hollow and unfamiliar with the whispers that still clung to the harvest house like mildew. She entered with the intent to catalog heirlooms, record titles, and prepare the house for auction. But on her third day, while clearing the cedar chest at the foot of the unused guest bed, she found something folded too tightly to be linen. It was a quilt, heavy, tightly stitched, stiff with age. Each square was embroidered with a name, not Randall names, not family names, just girls' names. 67 of them. Each one stitched in the same hand, delicate, deliberate, without flourish. Beneath many names were dates, each corresponding roughly to a child between the ages of 6 and 13. Some dates were full, day, month, year. Some only bore the year. And some had no date at all, just initials, small, incomplete, like someone stopped sewing halfway through. Margaret laid it out across the floor and realized the center square didn't match. It had no name, no date, just a single word stitched in coarse black thread. Mine. Unlike the others, it wasn't centered neatly. It was jagged, slanted, as if sewn in haste or frenzy. The fabric of that square was different too. Darker, coarser, and slightly stiffer, as though it had been treated with something long since dried. No records supported the quilt. Margaret searched trunks of church logs, letters, family journals. There were no adoption papers. No letters of guardianship. No entries in school registers bearing the names from the quilt. When she brought the quilt to the town cleric, he turned pale. He recognized 2 of the names, girls who had been reported missing in the 1860s, their disappearances long dismissed as runaways or flood casualties. One had vanished after a church potluck, the other after delivering eggs to the Randall porch. An investigation was quietly opened, though never made public. A retired constable who once oversaw child registries in the county was asked to examine the quilt. He traced at least 12 of the names to known disappearance cases that had gone cold within weeks. Each girl had last been seen within a 30-mile radius of Dyer's Hollow, but nothing else was found. No graves, no bones, no photographs, just the quilt. A seamstress brought in to examine the craftsmanship noted that the stitching pattern followed no known decorative design. Instead, the quilt squares seemed laid out in a spiral, beginning at the outermost corner and winding inward, ending at mine. When the quilt was folded in a specific way, according to the spiral's curve, the mine square always faced outward, as if meant to be the first thing seen, or offered. Margaret kept the quilt for several years, locked in a cedar trunk of her own, though she claimed it made her house cold in ways she could not explain. Visitors who stayed in the room with it reported dreams of narrow hallways and endless staircases. One child guest claimed someone whispered names in her ear while she slept, names not her own, names she'd never heard but could spell the next morning. Eventually, Margaret donated the quilt to a historical archive, which stored it in a vault without public record. No plaque, no exhibit. The chest it was found in is still kept in the harvest house unopened. Those who have touched the quilt speak of a strange warmth that lingers on the fingertips, not comforting, but clingy, as if something once held had never fully let go. Some say mine wasn't a claim of ownership, it was a promise, or worse, a confession. And each name stitched around it wasn't a memory, it was a warning, a pattern, a list of those taken, and the one who kept taking. The storm that struck Dyer's Hollow in the summer of 1895 came without warning. Lightning split a nearby elm that had shaded the Randall property for decades, and rain poured so hard it softened the foundation beneath the southern wall of the harvest house. In the weeks that followed, the outer stone began to shift. Cracks opened in the parlor baseboards. The back corridor floor buckled upward. And behind the house, a patch of soil sagged unnaturally as though something beneath it had finally exhaled. The town's council, still responsible for the structure's upkeep due to legal ambiguities, hired 2 men to stabilize the property. Their task was simple: reinforce the southern support beam and patch the exposed plaster near the dining room hearth. But as they stripped the outer paneling from a wall once thought solid, they uncovered something no plan, blueprint, or inspection had ever recorded. A sealed archway, bricked over with fine mortar, too clean, too intentional. The shape was narrow, barely shoulder width, and arched slightly at the top. One of the men joked that it looked like a mausoleum door stood on its side. They broke through by noon. Behind the bricks was a small passage only 6 feet long, ending in a wooden door with no knob. It was opened with a crowbar, and behind it the 17th room revealed itself. Smaller than a pantry, too cramped to turn around in, the room had no furniture, no windows, no vent. Its walls were lined with drawers, not cabinets or shelves, but hundreds of tiny square drawers, stacked neatly like apothecary bins. Each had a single brass handle polished to a sheen despite the years. Inside each drawer was a tooth. Some were small and round, others long, cracked, discolored with age. A few still had bits of thread tied through their roots, as if once connected to door handles or fence hooks. Dozens of the drawers bore names scratched faintly inside: Molly, Claire, Bet, Annalise. Others held initials, some barely legible. One drawer held a tooth wrapped in silk. Another had 2, one baby-sized, one adult. In the bottom corner they found a drawer that didn't open easily. When pried loose, it revealed a cracked molar blackened with rot and tied with a frayed piece of cloth. Beneath it, a folded note in a child's hand. Said she bit. The room had no other markings, no signs of ceremony, just the quiet order of method. Nothing scattered, nothing spoiled. It was a collection, not hurried, not random, but catalogued. A life's work arranged in silence. Historians later matched several of the names to girls once reported missing from the surrounding counties, but none had ever been conclusively identified. The drawers were taken into evidence, but many were never processed. Some vanished in transit. Others were mislabeled and lost to bureaucratic failure. The room itself was sealed once more, this time with steel plating and a bolted grate. But strange things happened afterward. One of the repairmen developed a nervous habit, clicking his teeth together when thinking, even in sleep. The other disappeared 2 months later, last seen pulling something from his own mouth in the back of a barber's shop. The metal drawer handles were said to hum in heavy rain, a faint vibration like a breath caught in the throat. They say the 17th room was the last to be found. But others believe there were more, rooms too small to walk into, spaces too dark to light, drawers that didn't pull open but pulled inward instead. If the harvest house had a heart, this was where it kept what it had chewed through. Not just the living, but the pieces it decided to save. The teeth, the names, the ones that bit back. In the winter of 1897, frost cracked the joists beneath the back porch of the harvest house. A hired mason brought in to replace the splintered wood struck something hollow while digging out the support frame. Beneath layers of soot-stained soil and half-buried stones, he uncovered a narrow cellar hatch. One not marked on any diagram, not included in the original construction plans. The iron latch was rusted shut, but once forced open, it revealed a staircase descending into a single hidden chamber barely larger than a tool shed. Inside, the air was dry and still, undisturbed by time or weather. There was no mold, no rodent damage, no damp, only dust, the kind that falls when no one breathes. In the center of the room sat a desk made from unfinished pine, and on it a leather-bound journal, its cover warped with age but unbroken. Stamped into its surface in faint, uneven letters was a single word: apprentices. The ledger's pages were crisp and carefully penned, each line dated, each name written in formal script. Every entry followed the same pattern: a name, an age, a brief list of traits. Cleans without prompting, or screams too quickly, Senor endures saltwater wash with silence, and then a final word, always in uppercase: complied or refused. Some pages listed more than one child per day. Others were blank save for the final verdict. One entry stood out: E-Barrow 11, removed tongue after third refusal. Complied. Another read simply, L, no name given. 8, did not grasp instruction. Refused. The margins of some pages bore faint stains, brownish and smudged as if the ink had bled. But the stains did not match the pattern of writing. They spread from corners, thumb width, and one page had a partial fingerprint impressed into the pulp. Toward the end of the journal, the entries became more erratic, sloppier. Some lines were scratched through with black ink, others smeared as if written by a trembling hand. The final page bore a single line, written with force that tore the paper beneath. The boy refused to lose his eye, disposed. No name, no age, just the refusal, just the punishment. Investigators brought in to review the chamber noted that the room had no exit save the stairwell. No bedding, no ventilation, only the desk, a locked cabinet filled with wax-sealed vials labeled with initials, and a tall wooden chair stained dark at the headrest and arm supports. One of the inspectors remarked it resembled a schoolmaster's seat, too tall for a child but placed at the exact center of the wall. On the floor beneath it, etched into the stone with a knife or chisel, were tally marks, 32 grouped in sevens. Beside them, faint letters barely visible. Each tried. A few of the names in the ledger matched former orphanage intakes from surrounding counties. Boys and girls who had gone into service but never returned. The Randalls had long claimed to take in apprentices, houseboys, sewing girls, helpers. Eunice often spoke of teaching patience through labor. Thomas called it refining the use of obedience. No charges were ever filed. The journal was quietly placed in county archives, mislabeled under estate inventories. The chair was removed, but the floor carvings were left intact. Visitors to the house afterward claimed the cellar beneath the porch felt colder than the rest of the foundation. Some said they heard footsteps above, even when alone. And one archivist, sorting old court records decades later, found a loose page tucked into the back of a baptismal registry. It bore a single sentence: "He took those who wouldn't blink." The Harvest House had no apprentices by the end, only entries, only verdicts. Children tested, measured, broken down to what they would or would not give. And when they reached the limit, when the final refusal came, Thomas called that failure. He called that disposed. In the brittle heat of every July, beginning sometime in the 1870s and continuing until shortly before her death, Eunice Randall hosted what the town called the Widow's Picnic. It was not advertised, no invitations were sent. But the same 5 women arrived each year, dressed in heavy black, faces drawn, hands gloved even in the peak of summer. They brought no children, no men, only baskets wrapped in lace and thermoses sealed tight. Eunice welcomed them with a silent nod. No music played, no prayers were spoken. The event took place at the edge of the orchard behind the Harvest House, where trees leaned inward like eavesdropping figures and the grass never grew past the ankle. A single table was set with mismatched china, wool cloths instead of linen, and centerpieces made not of flowers but of woven brambles twisted into careful spirals. The women sat always in the same order, Eunice at the head. Food was passed without sound, and when someone did speak, it was never above a whisper. Townspeople never approached. Children were warned to avoid the property during those days. But rumors passed. Some claimed the widows never truly ate, that the food remained untouched and the cups were filled with something thick and dark. Others said they sang, but not hymns, that the notes rose and fell in strange intervals, low and piercing, more like tuning forks than voices. In 1907, a photograph surfaced. Tucked inside the back of an old church ledger, it showed the women seated at the orchard table mid-meal. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. 5 women smiling faintly, aprons folded in their laps, heads tilted in polite attention. But beneath the table, barely visible at the edge of shadow, were their hands, gloved, each holding a small glass syringe. The image was brought to the attention of county investigators when a woman named Dorcas Hensley, believed to be one of the original attendees, was found in a sanitarium 2 towns over, confined for what doctors called ritual compulsions. In her final weeks, she repeated the same phrases again and again. "Ladle, not knife," she would whisper. "Don't look at the jars. Don't look when she stirs." Nurses reported that she refused to drink water unless it was served from a copper basin, and she screamed at the sight of glass bottles. She died curled into herself, muttering 5, 5, 5, then she's fed. When authorities searched the grounds of the Harvest House orchard in response, they found faint indentations in the soil, repeated patterns suggesting something had been buried, unburied, and reburied over time. One hole revealed a rusted apron clasp still holding a shred of wool. Another held a corked glass vial filled with something murky and yellowed, too degraded for identification. No full remains were ever found. The other women from the photo had either died or vanished from public record. Only their names remained, widows each having lost a husband under strange or uninvestigated circumstances. One drowned in a dry well, another found hanging from the cellar beam with her hands still folded in her lap. No charges were brought. Eunice had been dead for over a decade. But the orchard, once bright, grew thick with shadow. Some say the table was never removed, that when the wind rises in July it carries the sound of clinking china through the trees. And others swear that when the grass dries out midsummer, 5 patches always stay dark, always stay damp. No one brings picnics to the orchard anymore. No one sings near the trees, and no one, not even children, go near the ground where gloved hands once passed syringes like prayer. In the spring of 1912, 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, arrived at the St. Leon orphanage under vague circumstances. No official escort delivered them. No record listed their place of birth. They were dropped off by a farmer who claimed he'd found them walking the edge of Dyer's Hollow, clothes torn, eyes red, mouths tightly shut. They gave no names, carried no belongings, and for nearly a week none of them spoke a word. But their features, thin jaws, gray-green eyes, hair parted just so, reminded the matron of a family she thought long dead. She wrote in her logbook, "Randall line likely. It's in their silence." The eldest boy, estimated around 10, flinched at every closed door. The girl, no older than 7, wept without sound, tears falling down a face so still it looked like a mask. The younger boy refused food unless it came wrapped in linen. When asked where they'd come from, all 3 turned their heads at the same angle, as if watching something behind a wall. A visiting doctor suggested trauma. A priest muttered something darker. But no one pressed. Not yet. On the 13th night, the eldest boy finally picked up a pencil. He did not write a name. He did not write words. He drew. Slowly, with obsessive detail, he etched a floor plan of a house that spiraled like a snail's shell. Each turn led to another chamber, 17 in total. In the center of each room he marked a star. When asked what the stars meant, he did not look up. He whispered, "That's where Mama made the noises." The matron asked what kind of noises. He responded, "The ones that taught us how to hush." From that day on, the girl began tracing circles on the window glass with her fingertip over and over until the pads of her fingers bled. The younger boy hid his shoes each morning and stared at the floorboards, whispering, "They don't want to stay buried." At night, staff reported hearing rhythmic tapping coming from their room as though someone were counting. 3 taps, pause, 5 taps, pause, then a single one held longer, slower. It never matched the ticking of the orphanage clock. The children never referred to themselves by name, never spoke of a father. Only Mama. One night, the eldest was found crouched beneath his bed, teeth chattering though the room was warm. When pulled out, he kept repeating a single phrase. "She said pain was the hammer. She said silence is what we build." The children were separated after that, placed into different wings of the building. But even then, staff claimed they would hum the same strange lullaby at the same time each night. An off-key melody that ended in a single long note held until breath gave out. The girl died at 12. Pneumonia, they said. Her lungs full of fluid, though she had shown no signs of illness. The younger boy disappeared shortly after, one morning simply gone from his cot. The door had not been forced. His shoes were placed neatly at the foot of the bed. The eldest, now 16, was institutionalized in a facility upstate after biting a priest during confession. His final words before removal were, "The house taught us. We're just what's left." The map he drew was kept by the orphanage matron tucked behind a framed photo of the children. Years later, she swore that the stars on the drawing began to fade one by one, as if being rubbed out from within. By the time she died, only one remained at the very center of the spiral. What the children remembered was not a home. It was a machine, a ritual, a place where sound was shaped into obedience and silence was the reward for surviving. And in their minds, that place hadn't collapsed or crumbled. It waited, room by room, star by star, until someone returned to fill the last space. By the winter of 1916, the Harvest House stood like a wound no one could bandage. Its shutters had rotted. The porch sagged like a snapped neck. Weeds climbed the walls and choked the fence posts, yet no one dared enter. Not since the last child vanished from the orphanage 3 years prior. Town records called it an uninhabited hazard. But in whispered circles, the house was something else, not abandoned, unspent. After years of debate, the town council finally voted to bring it down. Not brick by brick, not with hammers or saws, but with fire. A full burn, clean, total. They chose a day with clear skies and low wind. A safe burn, they called it. Residents gathered at a distance. A preacher arrived to say a prayer, though he would not step beyond the gate. Matches were struck, kindling lit. Torches placed beneath the floor joists, soaked in kerosene. The flame caught fast, then failed. The first attempt ended with nothing more than smoke. The second, with a low hiss, like steam escaping from within the walls. On the third, a single ember sparked in the attic window, only to vanish mid-air like a moth swallowed whole. Perplexed, investigators walked the perimeter. What they found chilled them deeper than the cold. Salt. Packed tight between every beam, every floorboard seam. Not scattered, not accidental, but placed deliberately layer upon layer, forming a barrier not meant to keep something out, but to hold something in. When they broke open the threshold planks, they found carvings etched into the foundation stones, symbols not recorded in any scripture but vaguely familiar to the preacher who'd once studied obscure rites. Circles within circles, teeth like notches, a single repeated phrase, keep her warm, but never fed. The preacher returned the next day with 3 others. They stood at the corners of the lot, whispering blessings. Psalms mixed with words no one translated aloud. The 4th fire took hold at dusk. Flames rose high, higher than they should have. Windows shattered not with heat, but with a sound like breaking voices. The roof folded inward, not with collapse, but like something bowing. When the structure finally fell, it fell with a scream, not from within, but from the ground beneath. The ashes were left to cool overnight. By morning, they were still steaming. But when a surveyor stepped barefoot into the soil, as part of a folk test to read land warmth, he jerked back in horror. The dirt was cold, freezing cold. Not just beneath the ash, but 3 inches deep, then 6, then 12, as if the fire had never touched it. Over the years that followed, nothing grew on the lot, not grass, not moss, not weeds. The land rejected roots. Birds flew around the perimeter. Animals gave birth on other soil. Children who passed the old gate complained of headaches or sudden bloody noses or the sound of someone softly humming beneath their feet. A park was proposed, then a memorial. But nothing was built. Each time a project began, equipment failed or workers fell ill. Eventually, the town fenced the lot and planted signs that read, "Do not enter unstable ground." But it was never the ground they feared. It was the absence, the cold, the memory of a house that refused to burn the way others do, because it was never just wood and stone. It had been constructed not to shelter, but to contain. And when the walls fell, something else remained. Not visible, not nameable, but waiting, coiled in the frozen dirt, beneath the stars drawn by a child, beneath the hooks, the ledger, the hymn. Whatever the harvest house once held, it held completely, and even in ruin it holds still.